Last year's Verizon Droid Turbo was meant to answer a lot of phone enthusiast problems. Motorola claimed the phone could last for 2 full days, and with its durable ballistic nylon or metallized glass fiber reinforced with Kevlar, it would keep the phone from feeling slippery to prevent it from drops and falls. And even though battery life and durability didn't quite hold up to our expectations, the Droid Turbo did manage to impress us. But this year, Motorola has made history with their new Droid Turbo and provides an answer for an even bigger problem. Hello everybody, I'm Crystal, and this is Verizon's shatterproof Droid Turbo 2. Yes, Motorola claims this is the world's first phone with a shatterproof screen. It has what Motorola calls Moto Shatter Shield, and in our week of testing this, we're actually blown away because yes, we'd agree, this phone's screen is shatterproof. Whether it falls from 5 feet face down on concrete, skids across a hardwood floor, or tumbles down a set of stairs, the display just does not crack or shatter. So how's this possible? Well, the Moto Shatter Shield works due to the screen itself having 5 different layers. Instead of Gorilla Glass covering the display, like most phones, we have a piece of plastic that covers a flexible display. So when the phone takes a fall, this display is able to absorb the shock by bending instead of just shattering. Along with this, we have a dual touch layer, which is sort of for backup. It's dual touch, just in case the first touch layer does indeed break, you still have another. Now, having said all this, does that mean there will be no consequences from dropping the Droid Turbo 2? Well, of course not. Yes, the screen does not shatter, but with that plastic piece covering the display, it's prone to scratching more so than we see on most phones with glass panels. Of course, you'll start to see scuffs around the border of the phone with enough hard drops. And finally, the Droid Turbo 2 does not have a certified impact rating, so drop this phone enough from high up, and you could very well damage one of the components inside. However, we dropped this phone more in a week than the clumsiest person in the world would in a year, and the phone still appears to be working perfectly, although we do have some scratches on the display along with some wear and tear on the sides. Droid Turbo 2 owners, this shatterproof display is not an excuse to treat your phone like it has no feelings. Moto Shatter Shield is there just for those unlucky moments. Sure, you may scuff the sides or damage some hardware, just like you would with any phone, but you can be sure your display will hold up just fine. So does all this create a bad viewing experience for the screen? Well, not really. The 5.4-inch display is Quad HD AMOLED, so right out of the box you'll notice very vibrant colors and deep blacks. It looks very nice. There does appear to be more of a gap between the display and touchable screen itself, but it's actually not that noticeable. Text is quite sharp and colors seem to really pop. Viewing angles are decent. Of course, with most AMOLED screens, eventually they'll start to rainbow when held at sharp angles, but for the most part, it's a great screen. There are definitely some small compromises given the shatterproofing of the screen, but we were surprised at how well Motorola was able to maintain a good viewing experience. So this revolutionary technology does come with a bit of a price when it comes to design. A lot of you were mentioning how the front of the Droid Turbo 2 isn't the most appealing to look at, and we'd have to agree. There's a lot going on in the front with all these sensors, cameras, logos, and different size speakers. But to be fair, our review unit was white, which makes things a lot more noticeable than they would be on a black front panel. Also, that nasty Verizon checkmark between the speakers can come off because it's actually part of the screen protector. However, if you're going to remove this, make sure you quickly buy another, perhaps without the Verizon logo, as the protector is crucial to the Shatter Shield technology. We still have some pretty large sized bezels on the side, and it's a pretty chunky phone at 9.2mm, but its back curves up a little and then remains mostly flat, so the phone doesn't rock too much when on a desk. With a screen size of 5.4 inches, which isn't too large, the phone does feel a little more unwieldy than it should be, but with all that great technology coming together inside the Droid Turbo 2, it's more forgivable. The back is where the camera and flash live, surrounded by a metal border, and that Motorola dimple remains, which creates a nice resting point. It's a little higher than the one found on the back of the Moto X Pure, and actually I think that makes it feel a little more comfortable to hold. I do have small hands though, so it all depends on your hand size. On top, we have our headphone jack and our SIM card slot, which doubles as an SD card slot, so yes, the Droid Turbo 2 is capable of expandable storage. On the right side is our volume buttons and power button that has a bit of a textured feel to it, which makes it easy to feel for. For the first time, Motorola is allowing users to customize their Droid Turbo 2 through Moto Maker, which is awesome. It's starting to look like no matter what type of device Motorola makes, it'll be compatible with Moto Maker. So you can choose between a soft grip, which is similar to the one found on the back of the Moto X Pure, but it's a little softer feeling and has a different pattern, pebbled leather that comes with a free engraving, and of course, the ballistic nylon that Droid Turbo users love. Of course, the accent color is available to change as well, which also changes the top speaker grille. Oh, and remember, if you want to make this phone a little more pretty, definitely stick with that black front. Inside the Droid Turbo 2, we have a pretty impressive setup. Snapdragon 810 processor with an Adreno GPU and 3 gigs of RAM. It comes in two storage options at 32 gigs and 64 gigs. And once again, Motorola is claiming up to 48 hours of battery life with the Droid Turbo 2 with this huge 3760 mAh battery. You won't find any fingerprint scanner here, and although it looks like you have dual front-facing speakers, actually the only speaker that creates sound when watching content is the bottom right one, which is unfortunate, but the sound it creates is pretty nice, very crisp and clear. It gets pretty loud too, but at max volume some heavy compression starts to kick in. Now the software experience is phenomenal when it comes to any Motorola phone. However, with the Droid Turbo 2, while still great, the thing that disappointed us was that out of the box, this phone is running Android Lollipop 5.1.1 and not Android Marshmallow. Given that this is a Verizon exclusive, Verizon will be playing a part in how long it takes for Marshmallow to roll out, and given Verizon's track record, it could be a while. But besides that, the software is still great. The Droid Turbo 2 runs near stock Android with a couple of nice Motorola features that fans have always loved, like Moto Display that shows missed notifications over a black screen, which is even nicer on the Droid Turbo 2 with this AMOLED screen. Although OK Google voice commands while the screen is off is unavailable in Lollipop, Moto Voice is a great substitute as it does work when the screen is off and can be programmed to any voice command. It takes a little bit longer than OK Google as Moto Voice needs to translate your words before it sends you over to Google Voice, but it's a nice feature to have. The twist to open the camera feature is here, along with the chop to trigger the flashlight as well. The near stock software mixed with the A10 processor allows for very smooth internet browsing, and gaming is great as well. It's a fast and fun yet simple software experience, but once again Verizon has to put their little twist on it. There's a lot of pre-installed Verizon apps on this phone, along with a bunch of silly games. However, you can remove the majority of them. If you're familiar with the Moto Xperia camera, well, you can expect the same thing here on the Droid Turbo 2, a 21 megapixel rear-facing sensor that does a great job. There's no optical image stabilization, so you'll need a steady hand, mostly in lowly lit areas, but it shouldn't affect outdoor images. It takes great photos, colors look good, not the most saturated, but more realistic. In medium light, it does a decent job as well, but in low light, some grain will begin to show. Colors will lose their vibrancy, and like I said, you're going to have to make sure you keep a steady hand or your photos will be blurry. But in the end, low light pictures look pretty decent. The front-facing 5 megapixel shooter takes some great shots too. With this wide-angle lens, it's easy to get everything in frame and details look very good. Just like on the Moto X Pure, we have a front-facing flash, which is a little weird. In most situations you won't really need it, but in really dark areas it could come in handy, although it can be a little harsh sometimes. Video looks very good on the Droid Turbo and is also capable of shooting in 4K. Like I said earlier, there's no optical image stabilization, but the software stabilization does a pretty good job. Overall, it's a great smartphone camera as long as you stay away from the dark. Now besides that shatterproof screen, battery life is the other huge selling point of the Droid Turbo 2. With its huge 3760 mAh battery and Motorola's statement of 48-hour battery life, we had high hopes for the Droid Turbo 2. And in moderate use of texting all day, taking some pics, watching some videos, and surfing the internet for a while, we were able to get around 5.5 hours of screen on time, which for a phone with a Quad HD power-sucking display, that's very impressive. Motorola's 48-hour battery life claim may be the best case scenario with low use. However, the Droid Turbo 2 was impossible for me to kill in a day, so every night I would go to sleep with at least 40% of battery left. Without plugging the phone in overnight, I would wake up with around 35%, and that could last me for almost half the day. It's a hard number to put your finger on as every day is vastly different from one another, but on average, I was able to keep the Droid Turbo alive for around 30 hours with moderate use and standby overnight. Now, if you're a heavy gamer, a photographer, or a big-time video watcher, you may have to find a charger before the day is over. But that's where Motorola's Turbo Charger comes in handy, allowing 13 hours of battery life with just a 15-minute charge. Now really, this phone is like the Moto X Pure on steroids. Same camera and software experience, but with a groundbreaking shatterproof screen and phenomenal battery life. However, it may be a little less attractive to some and is unfortunately a Verizon exclusive, which will already put many consumers off. And on top of that, the Droid Turbo 2 comes with a pretty heavy price tag. Although there is a payment system in place with Verizon's Edge agreement at $26 for a 32 gig and $30 for the 64, The full price that we're looking at is $624 and $720 respectively. Now there is a cool little benefit that you get for buying the 64 gig, and that's the ability to change your design within 2 years of owning the device. You'll get an entirely new Droid Turbo 2, which sounds great, but there's also a fee to do this. It's a pretty expensive phone, and yes, this is the first phone in the world that answers our biggest problem, but it still seems a little pricey. It's a great phone, but unless you're somebody who's constantly dropping your phone, that price may steer some users away. Well, thanks for watching. Make sure you leave a comment below and let me know what you think of this phone. Also leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Make sure you check out these other cool videos on the side here. If you want our Android Authority app, click on that Google Play link up there. And last but not least, head on over to androidauthority.com for a more in-depth review, as we are your source for all things Android.